So in this lesson, we're going to look at why wages differ. So far, we've looked at the demand and the supply of labor and also how we define the labor force. So we want to start with a little bit of review. So in the labor market, the demand for labor is derived from the value of the marginal product of labor. So what we're looking at here is basically we're saying that the more valuable the product being produced, the more valuable that labor becomes, and there's a limit to the number of employees we want to hire before we start to see diminishing returns within what we're doing with our employees. And that's because, of course, one of the things we said within that short amount of time is that we've got this fixed capital that we can't change, and therefore it's very difficult to bring in a whole, let's say, 10 more workers and actually see a significant increase in production because they're just getting in each other's way. We just don't have enough room. So the more productive a resource is, the more valuable the resource is. And that's a key factor here because we're talking about in terms of labor. The more productive you are as a worker, the more valuable you are to the firm. In the case of labor, the more productive the labor is, the more valuable the labor becomes, the higher the wage the labor will receive. So the more productive you are, the more valuable you are. And the more valuable you are, the higher the wage you will receive. So the result is that firms will pay skilled laborers. Now this is key. So the result is that firms will pay skilled laborers more than unskilled laborers because they have a higher value of marginal product. And this is one of the first things we're really going to look at. It's really important to understand that when you talk about skilled versus unskilled labor, essentially anyone can do. And so there's not a lot of value in those types of individuals because there's not a lot of value in the products they produce. On the other hand, when you talk about skilled laborers and people who have a certain set of skills, their value increases, and the more productive they are, the more value so there's automatically going to be a gap between what we see for skilled and unskilled labor. So we're going to begin with demand, and we're going to look at the demand for skilled and unskilled labor. So what is the difference in terms of the demand for these types of workers? So when we start looking at this, well, here's our demand for unskilled labor. Here's the demand for skilled labor. So notice there's a higher demand for skilled labor than there is for unskilled labor. Now, in terms of the number of hours worked per day, they both work 7 hours, but notice the difference, of course, in the wage. So when in this sense here, we see that the wage, 7 hours of work is going to put them at $6 an hour for the unskilled laborer, whereas the skilled laborer is going to make $10 an hour. So we see this difference here, and this vertical distance, that's the difference in wages between unskilled and skilled labor. So we see that point. So the value of the marginal product of the skill. Now that's key. Value of marginal product of the skill. It's the skill itself. It doesn't matter who the individual is. It's the skill that's valuable. So the vertical distance between demand for unskilled and the demand for skilled labor is the value of marginal product of the skill. Labor is treated like any other resource. People aren't looking at you as a person, look at you as a resource, as a skill. What do you offer them? That's the key point here. So in this example, the VMP of the skill results in a wage difference of $4 an hour. So because the skill is more valuable, the skilled worker, the person who has those skills, can thus make more money. And that's one of the easy key features to understand here is when you look at it from the standpoint of saying, okay, who am I going to pay more? I'm going to pay the person who has the higher skill set more because they are more valuable to the company. And that's essentially what this graph is showing us. So let's look at this difference in wage scales. So there's two primary factors involved in the development of different wage scales. The first of which is human capital. The second is job discrimination, which we'll look at in a short bit. But this human capital, in other words, like we just said, human capital is accumulated skill and knowledge of people. So when we talk about it like that, basically what we're saying is the more educated you are, the more skilled you are, the more knowledge you have, the more valuable you become in the workforce. And this includes not only education, but also on-the-job training. And that's something that I think a lot of people kind of forget. A lot of people think education and automatically think college. That's not necessarily the case. When you talk about highly skilled electricians, plumbers, carpenters, these types of individuals, those are people who develop their skills on the job training, internships, and things like this. And if you look at the local high schools, you see they all have these different CTE programs which emphasize those skill building sets. And the reason for that, of course, is that way kids who don't want to go to college can still graduate from high school, have a set of skills, and be able to take those skills and develop them more so they become more valuable. So when you're looking at what you're doing, you have to understand that businesses look at you from the standpoint of how valuable are you going to be to them. So the demand for the labor of unskilled and skilled workers differs based on the value of marginal product of the skill. For each new skill, how much more valuable does that worker become? So the result is that the higher skilled worker earns a higher hourly wage than does the skilled worker. And you can see it, of course, when we looked at the graph. It's very, very clear that the more skills you have as a laborer, the more valuable you become to the firm, and thus the more you get paid in terms of your wages. So the reason that the difference in wage occurs is because the skill that differentiates the two laborers must be obtained. And that's the key, is the unskilled laborer can become a skilled laborer, but they must obtain that skill. And that's one of the big points here, is just you don't just wake up and have the skill. You have to develop it. You have to obtain it. You have to acquire it. And so in order to acquire that skill, some amount of effort has to go into that. So essentially what we're saying here is that businesses reward individuals for taking the effort to gain more skills. So you can see here, human capital is costly to acquire. It has opportunity costs associated with it. That include the cost of acquiring the skills, but also the cost of loss or reduced earnings while acquiring the skill. So you could go to college, graduate in 4 years, get a job. Or you could stay an extra 2 years, earn a master's degree. Now that's 2 years you're giving up of earnings. But in the process of doing so, you're going to make more money. I did this. This is what I did essentially. Is I went to school, graduated from college, immediately got into my master's program. Did not have enough time to finish it. I finished it, but upon finishing it, I got a large enough pay raise that made it worth it. And so that's the thing, is that as you obtain more skills, your wages increase, but you have to weigh that against the opportunity cost. That's why a lot of, like, you see people going into being doctors and getting their PhDs and getting their MDs. You see these individuals that have debt because basically they're losing earnings while finishing and acquiring those skills. So as a result, there's a lower supply of skilled laborers than unskilled, and that's the key point here. Remember, demand has everything to do with value. Value has everything to do with scarcity and utility. How scarce is something? How useful are they? Well, when we get into the labor market, that's where this really comes true. Higher skilled workers, there's less of them, which makes them more valuable. As a result, they get paid more. Now, on the other side, we look at the supply of skilled and unskilled labor. So education represents an expenditure of resources at one time to raise productivity in the future. So you're essentially, you think about like financial capital and stocks and bonds, you're investing now for future wages. And that's the key point here when we talk about education, is the investment you make now, it doesn't pay off immediately. High school just does not pay off immediately. However, it pays off down the road when you go through college, you graduate, and then you have developed that skill set to become more valuable in the workforce. So we can look at the supply of unskilled labor here and the supply of skilled labor. So the supply of skilled labor is higher in terms of wages, once again, than the unskilled. And of course, we've talked about this. When you look at it here, 7 hours of labor, notice that the supply here is at $5.25 or so, whereas it's just around around $9 an hour here for the supply of skilled labor. So when we look at that, what we see, of course, is we see that vertical gap again. So the distance between the two. So compensation for the cost of acquiring the skill. So that's the thing, is that when you look at supply, skilled laborers make more than unskilled because they're basically being paid for acquiring the skill. You're being compensated. So while making less money early on, you'll make more money in the future, and that's your compensation for acquiring the skill that you are going to be using. So you see here a vertical distance between the supply of skilled and unskilled labor is the compensation for acquiring the skill. It would be as if I went and decided to go back to college right now to get another degree, to get maybe my PhD. I would have to give up revenue, my earnings now, in order to make more in the future. And well, that's, of course, is an opportunity cost. You would have to decide, is that actually going to pay off? So on this slide, we'll put them together and look at the market for labor. So here we have our demand for unskilled labor. Here we have the supply of unskilled labor. So here's our equilibrium. So with this, we're looking at about a 7.5 hour workday with about $5.50 an hour. We see that. We pull in our demand for skilled labor, our supply of skilled labor, and you'll notice the difference between the two equilibriums. That is the difference in the market between skilled and unskilled labor. So there's a very significant gap between the two, and that's the difference there between the wages, between acquiring those skills and not acquiring them. So the vertical distance between the two equilibriums is the wage differential between skilled and unskilled labor. Now, when you look at this, it'll give you a better idea, and you can actually see the difference. So when we look at men in 1980 compared to 2000, notice the high school, no college has barely seen an increase in wages. I mean, we're talking about literally 430 to 770 over the course of 20 years. But look at the difference for college graduates, 52.49 versus 69.42. So you see here percent extra for college grads. So in 1980, college graduates made 44% more. In 2000, they made 89% more. In other words, it's becoming increasingly more important for individuals to graduate from college to get a pretty good job. Now, and it's even building further past that. Because if you look at women here, high school, no college, look at the difference in wages there for women to men, and then college graduates. Even so, we see here, women in 1980 made 35% more as a college graduate. In 2000, they made 70% more as a college graduate. So we can look here, men are making significantly more money. We're going to talk about that. But one of the things we do notice here, of course, is that we see a significant noticeable difference between the amount of money being earned by college graduates versus high school students. And these aren't small numbers. I mean, that's 89% is a significant difference. There's a massive difference between 36,770 and 69,421. And when the other thing about this you have to understand is, of course, there was inflation taking place during this time, so prices were increasing. So the reality is, if we were to sit back and adjust all of these numbers for prices, what we're probably going to see is that in 2000, the value of that wage for high school and no college is probably lower than the value of the 1980 one because of the inflation. But this puts a visual to the point of how important acquisition of those skills are. So when you're able to acquire more skills, your pay increases, and there's a significant gap that develops between individuals who have those skills and individuals who do not have those skills. Okay, so this slide is going to do more just to emphasize the point we were just making. When you think of these earnings as your total revenue for life. So this is what it looks like from a revenue perspective, the average revenue you would make depending on your degree, in other words, your skill level. So when we look at the high school, we're talking about less than $1 million. That's for dropouts. High school diploma, 1.3. Some college, no degree, 1.5. Associates, 1.7. That's a 2-year degree. Bachelor's degree is 2.2. Master's is 2.6. You'll notice, of course, as you earn more education, in other words, as you acquire more skills, your wages increase. Now, there is a monstrous difference between dropping out of high school and graduating from college. There's a huge difference between just getting your diploma and getting that high school diploma and getting dropped out. I mean, goodness gracious, we're talking about a significant amount of money. And then you talk about going high school to bachelor's degree in college. So your ability to acquire skills is going to directly relate to how much earnings you're going to have in the course of a lifetime. And that's a tremendous amount of money that we're talking about in terms of a difference from year to year basis. I mean, high school diploma to bachelor's degree is almost $1 million in difference. And then, of course, less than high school to that bachelor's degree is well over $1 million in difference in terms of how much you're going to make over the lifetime. Okay, so the next thing we'll talk about is this outsourcing. Go to a little more specifics about that. So many unskilled jobs have been eliminated by outsourcing. So why would you outsource as a firm? Well, unskilled labor is outsourced because those jobs do not require extensive training. If you think about firms that are moving their production off seas into Mexico or into China, what we know for a fact is those workers do not have very high levels of education. Some of them have none at all. But the job that they're doing is such a simple procedure that they can do it requiring very, very little training. And that's kind of the key, is if you're in a job in which literally you almost need no training at all, then there are machines or there are people who can do it cheaper than you can. And so this means more people can do them. And because of minimum wage laws, outsourced workers can do them cheaper. And that's the key point here, is that when you look at the company's total revenue versus total cost, companies operating in the United States that manufacture have a higher total cost than companies that do so outside of the United States. Now, the only reason why some companies would produce within the United States is if the skill is just something that it's just something that needs required development, or possibly, and this is one of the big reasons, if you're a firm and you have unskilled workers and you're still within the United States, it's more than likely that the product you produce is too expensive to ship, or acquisition of resources and getting them there is too high of a cost. Because anytime that you outsource, what you're looking at is that it's going to reduce your cost. So if you own a firm and you're producing something in the United States and your total cost can be reduced by moving that factory production overseas, then that's what you're going to do, because remember, profit maximization is your goal. So if you own a company that makes blue jeans, and the question is, would you pay workers $7.50 an hour to make jeans that cost you, say, $4 to make, when you can move the factory to Mexico and pay workers there $2 an hour? Well, that's an obvious answer for any firm decision here, is to say, yes, we're moving that factory. And this consideration of, well, people are going to lose jobs, doesn't care to them, because they're looking at how can they maximize the profits. They've got to answer to their shareholders. Okay, let's look at this chart here. So it says unemployment and earnings for workers 25 and older by educational attainment. So we're looking at how much money, and then looking at the unemployment rate. Now, what's interesting, you'll notice, is that on the left is the unemployment rate. Now, notice that doctoral degrees still have an unemployment rate. There are doctoral degrees that just aren't that valuable at times. But look at the difference. Notice how much the unemployment rate drops by educational attainment. So just graduating high school gives you 2.5% more chance of finding a job than it does to be a high school dropout. On the other side, you'll see the weekly earnings. Now there's a significant difference here. So let's just take basic bachelor degree. So bachelor's degree, if you have one of those, unemployment is about 2.3%, and the median weekly earnings is just under $1,000 a week. Look at the high school person though, 4.3%. So 2 percentage points higher, more likely to be unemployed. And then you're making $595, so let's just say $600. So you're making $362 less a week. So if you take that into 4 weeks, that's over $1,300. So there is a significant difference between the educational attainment, the skill set that you develop. Now, what you'll notice, of course, is this professional degree is worth more than a doctoral degree, and a lot of that because doctoral degrees are PhDs, and PhD candidates tend to work in universities which don't pay as well, and they make most of their money writing books, and not all of them are very good. A professional degree, on the other hand, like something like an MBA, for example, will generate a lot more profit. So if you were going to look at degrees, you would be best to get a professional degree as opposed to a doctoral degree, which most of these doctoral degrees are individuals who are working as professors, PhDs, those types of things. So reason number one for the difference in wage skills, we said, was the human capital and the ability to acquire skills. Well, the second primary reason for why wages differ is job discrimination. Think back a second about that chart that I showed you with the percentage difference in what men and what women made as college graduates, and you get an idea really quickly about wages. So job discrimination is a difficult subject, because while it most definitely exists, it's happening. Not all graphs and numbers are a result of job discrimination, so you kind of have to really look at the numbers and understand where the numbers are coming from and how they were calculated to actually see if what's being said is actually truly taking place. So, for example, the average wage of males is higher than that of females. However, the number of women obtaining college degrees is increasing while the number of men obtaining college degrees is decreasing. So while the average wage of males is increasing, what we're noticing, of course, is that the number of men with the necessary skills are in decline, whereas the number of women with those necessary skills is actually increasing. So one would expect that if job discrimination is not occurring, then at some point the average wage of females would rise above that of males. And so that's what I'm showing you. Is you look at it and you say, okay, based on the fact that more women are obtaining college degrees and therefore have more necessary skills than do males, you would expect that female wages would be increasing to the point that they're equal and then above that of males. But the question is that the case? The answer is no. You saw the graphic. The answer is most definitely no. So does job discrimination occur between males and females? And the answer to that is yes. And we know it's a yes because we can look at the graphs and see, just based on educational attainment alone, that two individuals, a male and female, who have the exact same educational skill set can be paid different amounts, and the male will be paid higher. So if it does not, then we can assume some job discrimination is taking place. And that's the thing, is we can assume that job discrimination is taking place when it comes to males and females in the hiring and the wage expectancy of firms. Now, for job discrimination to produce consistent wage differences, people must pay to be prejudiced. And that's the interesting thing here, is that you actually as a company are going to have to pay in order to be prejudiced against hiring or paying a certain group of people less than you would another. And the reason why that is very simple. If you're going to pay males higher than you're paying females who both have the same educational, or women who have a higher educational skill set than do males, then you're costing your company money because you're not hiring the best worker. So studies have shown that firms that do not discriminate have lower labor costs than those who do, and thus earn greater profits. In other words, if you don't discriminate, your firm is more profitable. So it actually costs you profits to be prejudiced. And that's why we say that they're paying for it, because they're actually losing money, what they could be making, in an attempt to try to discriminate. So when we talk about discrimination, companies that do discriminate, and it's been proven that they do, they're actually not maximizing profits. So it costs a firm money to discriminate than it does to not discriminate. So you're better off just not doing it. So if a firm chose to discriminate in a competitive market, that firm eventually would be replaced by a non-discriminatory firm because of the lower cost and thus greater profit maximization. So discrimination actually hurts you in the workforce. It hurts you to try and discriminate because it's costing you profits.